on the internet. My name is Matt. This is Coder Convoy. Today we are looking at Engo and how to use that with Golang, and the aim will be to make a heads-up display. First of all, some good news. The pull request I made where we changed add on all the various systems in the common library to be add by interface. We didn't actually change them. We added a bonus one called add by interface. Well, that has been accepted by the Engo team. So that means when you want to add a component or an entity to a system, you no longer need to remember all of those bits. You can just add the object as a whole. So that's good news. Here is the game I've been working on and its current progress. Now we have a new guy who can run around and hit things. That was quite fun. He actually just stays looking at the ball, basically. So wherever the ball is, he turns based on that. The rats face the direction they're going. It's not the other way around. They don't go the way they're facing. But it seems to work out. Graphically, I'm quite happy with the way that is. So that's good. So today, yes, we're going to be adding the heads up display. And that should be a bit of a challenge. I'll show you what I'm looking for in a second when we move. No. Okay, so like I say, today we are going to be adding a heads up display. The purpose of this heads up display will be to show scores, show health, and everything like that. So I'm going to show you what I've already put together, a game which has a heads-up display, though it's not a terribly effective one right now. It doesn't even keep score, but it doesn't move the same as the rest of the camera system, and that was the important part of the heads-up display. To do that, in Engo, they use a separate set of shaders for the heads-up display to the rest of the program. That's using OpenGL, and when you do it, you just need to choose the correct shader and it will be rendered in a different place. So it's not a whole lot of extra work, but I will do that today and talk about a little bit about the message system and how that's supposed to work, so we can get that, so we can keep scores going in between and communicate. I think the majority of the stuff on the message system will come out next week. Today I'm trying this slightly differently. I've already recorded the code and I'm going to speak over the top. So yep, here we are. We're making a new file in the play package, and this is called hud.go. Makes sense really, doesn't it? Hopefully this will mean I talk at a reasonable pace and what I say makes sense, and I can include some other details that I forgot to mention while I was too busy thinking about coding. Let me know if you think that this is a good way for me to make these videos. If you like it, I will do more this way. If you don't, I will go back to the old system. So, we've made a HUD system struct. Basically, that's going to be the system that we're going to use to make this game, to make the HUD display. I figured if we put the scores and everything that comes inside this, we'll use that. I'm also going to add players and player types to the system, so every player will have a score and a health, so we can keep a track on their health and their score as they move. What I want to do, and it did work in the end, was I managed to get the interfaces working on the score system. It didn't quite go the way I planned the first time I typed it, but it did come out in the end. So here we go, a player needs a health and a score. And they're also going to have a display component, but we'll probably get to that in a minute. Now, the HUD system is going to be a normal system that works in the world, in the Engo. So, to make it fit that system, it needs to have a couple of methods. The first method it needs is, well, it doesn't actually need the new method, but if it has the new method, Engo does stuff, it calls this new method when it first runs. That actually takes a pointer to ECS World, not ECS World. That'll get fixed in a minute. So yeah, a pointer to ECS World. The other thing this needs is, of course, the update and remove method. The update basically receives the time, the change in time since the last update, and changes the world based on that. So if anyone has scored anything since then, I'll need to change what's shown on the screen. The other thing, change in time is a float 32. And that doesn't return anything. And the other one it needs is, of course, remove. I'm not going to bother writing remove very thoroughly today, because I don't think I'm going to need to remove anything. I may do at some point, but I didn't need to today to get everything working. So this takes an ECS basic entity. I think personally that this should have to take to receive an interface with ID. So the method ID, because every basic entity has that method ID, and by receiving that method instead, or the interface, it's slightly easier to use from a number of people. I don't think it's a big problem in the current way the Engo system works, but I do think that would be an improvement. It feels more Golang style, I guess, to receive an interface. So say receive an interface, return a struct where possible. So the update method, won't worry about that right now. Let's get the HUD system including what it needs to include. What does it need to include now? I can't remember what I wrote. Number of players. Decided not to put that here. So it actually needs not a number of players, but it needs a list of players, and the player will then be the type that we've got. So when we make it, if we use a creation function, then that will do that job. So here is my attempt at writing it, slightly the slow way round. So yeah, don't forget to include the word func when you're declaring a function, and make sure to define the return type. I normally get there in the end, I suppose. So HUD system, yes, we return a HUD system. And it receives a number of players. It'll probably receive some other parameters at some point, but at least with a number of players, we can start to make our struct. Traditional for loop stand here, nothing particularly new to see. And then in there we'll just make the players. So we'll have a list of players and we'll add them, and when we return at the very end, we'll create the struct and throw everything into it. That feels like a reasonable way to do this. The HUD system's going to need a few other pointers. In the end, I think I found I needed the render system if I got access to the render system, because obviously I'm going to be adding and taking stuff out of the render system as I go with this. So kind of handy to have that available. So I got a bit stuck here. I was like, I need to add a player. What does the player need? How do I make this struct? Let's go back and fix what that player actually is supposed to contain. Just left it wide open. Never remember to close anything. So a player obviously is a struct, so I need to input his health and his score. Fairly straightforward. Incoming health, incoming score. The challenge was how I wanted to create right now I'm trying to import the font. I just stick a font, any font.ttf file in your assets, and then load it easily. I just grabbed this one off the internet. It said free for commercial use, so go ahead, and that's me stealing it from another project of mine. But I didn't make the font, someone else did. So what am I making here? A text entity. So this is the way I intend to display text, at least for now. The theory is, with a text entity, if I make it make it fit an interface, then I can store the interface in player, and if I change how I like to display things, then I just put a different entity which fulfills the same interface. So for now, I'm going to output health as a number on the text in the screen. But later, I may choose to show health as a list of hearts or something. And so if I have a method that fits that, which is like set num, which is what I went with in the end, then if I've got one thing that changes hearts and another thing that draws a rectangle and another thing that puts it as text, they can all just fulfill the interface set num, and the player doesn't need to know how they show the score, just that they will show it somehow when it changes to set num. So I'll make that fit the interface. Let's see what comes out. I type very slowly. I think very slowly when I'm coding, and now that I'm talking about it, watching, it's kind of interesting to see how slow I write my code. Let's see if I get there in the end. This is just the string I want to show before it. So for the text entity to show a thing on the screen, it will be helpful if it has a bit of a message, because health and score are different. So if we just put a different letter in, it will be able to behave appropriately, not caring what that is. It needs a basic entity. That's a common, no, that's ECS.basic-entity and a common.render component and a common.space component. Don't forget the package when you use stuff from another library. This is Engo stuff, right? These are the components included. And I made a bit of a mistake here, and this took some time to fix, but I started to put in a text component as a separate thing, and that didn't work well. I don't know exactly why not, but it seems to require some part of the entity, and it's not just the interface that the drawable needs to receive. Anyway, I couldn't change the way text worked, and it panicked a lot as a result. So this function is my setNum function, the one that is going to meet that interface so that everything can, and I'm putting the text in the wrong place. Apparently talking and coding is hard. I was talking to the camera while I was doing this and got confused. There we go. Alright, so this is setNum. This is the method, and again, I got a little bit wrong here as I started trying to work things out. Forgot to put the parameters. We'll get back to the parameters. So here what I'm trying to do is work out what I'm going to put, how I'm going to change the right part of the render component. And as I'm writing this, I made a mistake. Well, I realized that a render component stores a drawable. And I don't know how to... I would need to use reflection to get hold of that drawable if I just wanted to change the internal text of a drawable. And I didn't really want to use reflection, or I didn't want to use... I could have used a type assertion, I suppose. The expectation would be that I already knew it was a drawable, so I shouldn't need to worry too much about it, but I didn't want to use type assertion. I probably shouldn't care about it that much. Anyway, so that's why I added the common.text to the entity, and the theory was that I would have that as a pointer to a common.text, I guess, and then when I change the common.text, it will change inside the render component. This didn't work, so I couldn't make it work, and in the end I found it was better just to change the drawable part of the render component and just reassign it to a new drawable. So instead the text entity will store a font, and that will handle this. So don't worry too much about this code here. I'm just showing it for, I guess, posterity. This didn't work. We'll fix it later. Okay, so we finished writing that, and I decide to add these interfaces to the object. Although it's not an interface yet, so I need to actually define the interface. The name I went with in the end was a set number. Golang like verbs, I guess. No, things to end in for their interfaces. It makes sense to me. It's like writer, reader, do whatever, and so this is my set number, and this takes two. It has two things. One, it has a common.basic face, and the common.basic face is part now of the Engo library, which provides the two methods id and getBasicEntity, which returns a pointer to a basic entity, so you can change it or use it as you wish. The second is setNum, which is that method I was talking about, the one that will allow me to put in different objects to the player that will be setNummable, so that I can not worry how the number is handled, just know that it will be handled, and that's kind of handy. I probably want to put a set max on that, because most things have a max health, which may change at some point. Okay, so this is my new text entity method that I'm trying to add to the system. The plan of the new text entity is just to save me a bit of typing when I make a new entity, I guess. I need to... Since so much of it doesn't actually change, I just threw it into this function, so a text entity. I knew I was going to need to type this at least twice, and possibly more times if I keep using them, so that was why I decided... I don't know, I kind of wanted to be able to see where I was working, what was what in the for loop, so that was why I did it this way. Obviously this is an ECS.NewBasic. In case you're not sure, I've not told you already, an ECS.NewBasic basically just takes the next number. It starts at 0, grabs a lock, increments that every time it makes a new basic, just safely, so that every basic entity will have a different identity, so you can get rid of an entity across a whole system or lots of systems at once. The render component has a couple of tricky parts to it. Render component needs a drawable, and color is an option, but I think if you set its color, it just fills that color, so you may not want to. So the drawable that this will take will be a text thing, right? And this is me deciding. It took me ages to decide how I was going to do this, and in the end the right result was just not bother, just put a new drawable inside and replace that drawable every time. So here I've realized that I need my HUD system to have a font accessible. So I just decided I'll just receive it as a usable font, and then when I make my new basic entity, my new text entity, I can set its font to whatever comes in. And so it meant adding another thing to the parameters. Mild annoyance, I guess, but I might change how I do that at some point, but passing them around as a parameter is not that bad. In fact, it's probably vaguely helpful. The mistake I did make was not to initialize it properly. We'll get to that in a bit, but there are two methods you need to call when you make a font component. First, you need to load it, and the second thing you need to do is, once you've got it, you need to actually call a method which is build it, based on font size and other things, because loading it isn't enough to be able to just use it directly. It's like you have to make another version of it for every different size or thing. So anyway, I decided just to set that drawable to DB, and I don't think there was anything else that it needed in the drawable, in the render component. Oh, I set the color to black, and this isn't in brackets. It shouldn't be in brackets because it's a constant. The two constants that come with color are black and white. They're just too easy, 0, 0, 0, and FFFFFFs. And so yeah, that's why that was a mistake. I shouldn't have. So that should be just no brackets. In fact, it's not even needed there because the font component will tell you the color anyway. So it's not needed. That's another mistake I've got there. That shouldn't be 0 in quotes. That's not very helpful. New text display. New text entity, that should say. I was mildly annoyed at having to write the whole details of a space component, but in the end I couldn't avoid it as I had to put the points on appropriately. So yeah, inside that component, it was worth setting the position, which is an engo.point, which means a struct declaration. A little bit more annoying work, but you know how it is when you just want something to be able to write A or B or something and fit it in the brackets. Well, that didn't quite work out for this. So, excuse me while I just drop those down, fill in the points. Okay, so now I've put in the points. Basically, I've used I to get the position based on how many players there are, so they should all move a bit further left for every single one. That 20 isn't enough. It should have been more, but no worries. The challenge, we need to add to the render system what these objects, so it's kind of helpful to have a render system to add them to, which means an extra which of course means an extra parameter when we make the thing. And I think I needed to store the font as well, just to make sure all the players could happily access the font. Although I didn't worry about it here, I found that I needed to store the font in each player slightly later, when I got rid of the text bit. I'm really bad at using the autocomplete. I keep wanting to push down, and when you push down it just selects the top one. You need to hold Control N, not down, in order to choose the next item in Vim's autocomplete thing. It's Control X, Control O, fill it in, and then Control N to choose the next one, or Control P to go for the previous in that list. So obviously we need to return the struct which these are in, otherwise we don't end up with a HUD system that we can use. So and that was a capital S. I should probably so that'll need fixing. So now that we've got our HUD system, there are mistakes in it, so it won't build. I know that now, but I think I knew that before I even tried to build it. You know, whenever you're writing code, there's mistakes. Oh, and this is my attempt to try to make the text display work externally and add it as a component to each part, because these players don't yet have a render system attachment to them or a render component. The HDisp is an interface, and so it's not, and that interface isn't big enough for renderable. Maybe I should make it usable as a render face so that I can add it directly and not worry, but for now my logic was keep these as separate things, and then add them to the system, to the render system, and store them as interfaces in the player. This might not have been the right way of doing it. Maybe I just needed to make the interface a bit bigger so that I could also add them to the render system. That would make a lot of sense too, I think. Oh, the reason I didn't was because I wasn't sure whether some of them might need to be added more parts to the render system, or even actually access the render system. Not completely sure about that. Like, if you've got 3 or 4 hearts you need to add, and the hearts are all different images, then that means you need to add 4 different components to the render system. And so making the interface work, it can't necessarily be an add to interfaceable. That's part of the reason I've just gone for text right now, is that's relatively straightforward. So there we go. rs.addByInterface, HDisp and SDisp. That is me using the methods from my own pull request into the Engo. So they've accepted that. So if I just, the other way would be to write add and then HDisp.ECS basic entity, and then all 3 components needed in order. Which I guess isn't that much harder, but this way works. Slightly more readable at this stage. So here we are at the scene, and we need to try and add that main scene. We need to load the files. Okay, so basically I'm adding the load to the font file. Here I type assets first just to get the autocomplete to work. You shouldn't need, that's just me being silly. Important though, don't forget to write the error is not equal nil, then show the error, because I forgot to do that this time. And then when I was trying to debug, it wasn't as clear. So you get an error, handle the error. I don't know why I forgot to do it. So once we've loaded the font, we need to include that font in the main setup. We need to actually get loaded font, as it were, make a font that uses that loaded detail. I did make a mistake here, and it should be fairly obvious. So here I've decided that I don't need anyone else to be able to access the score system. It will just listen for messages, which means that I can just add it directly to the world and hope for the best. I may later find that that's not the best way to do it, but I'm going to make a new HUD system and give it the parameters, which were the number of players, ms.endplayers. That this is received as actually a flag to the program currently. It works. I think it's better when I get the game going further that will be an option on the main menu. But for now, receiving a flag to say the number of players it's something. Obviously, we need the render system, and the last thing we need is the font. Now, this was a mistake. I just thought, I'll screw it. I'll just put the font in here. But I forgot that I needed to call another method on this font called like create preloaded font or something. So you've got to, once you've loaded it, you need to call this create method on the font object. So you create the font struct and then you call create. So here I just got to fill in, it needs the URL, which is basically the file reference that you used. The other thing it will need is a font size and a color, right? So I didn't need the other color, and here I still made the mistake of using color.black in brackets. Doesn't matter, that was a mistake, we'll ignore that. And the size, which can be a number, doesn't matter much, just go for a reasonable number. Oh, and it's FG, not yeah. The problem with just making it directly here is that you can't pre-construct it before sending it in, so that was a mistake. Okay, so all of the errors I tried to produce to make it, and there's lots of errors here. So I just go through and fix these errors. There's a few, so slowly. Most of them are fairly straightforward. I keep calling things by the wrong name. I'm forgetting to write the word common all over the place. I'll show you most of these fixings, because if I've made an error, showing me fixing them will at least help you to see where the mistake is and not to make the same mistakes that I keep making again and again and again. So we received the space component, so we don't need to do that. Cannot use font as a type common.font in field value. Oh, so yeah, it needed to be a pointer. And so I just had to propagate that. It's a pointer back through the system. The undefined text entity, that's just a spelling error. That's fixed. Took me surprisingly long to find that mistype, but it is there. Entity. Oh yeah, that was that mistake I made a while ago. Undefined text display. It's actually an entity. So why do I call it a text display? And I have no idea. I have honestly no idea why I decided to call that a display. But we'll find it now and get rid of that. So cannot use I times 20. I has to be an int. Well, I guess it doesn't have to be, but for creating the array, it kind of makes sense that I would be an int. Oh no, it does, because it's going less than number of players, so you can't do a comparison that's not an int anyway. And I'm not going to take number of players as a float. That just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I just have to do a conversion on the floats to an int, the int to a float to make them fit in the engo.point, which is 2 floats. HUD61 cannot use font.comment. So yeah, then I've got to propagate all of the point. I made the mistake of thinking they weren't pointers, and now I just got to run back through and make sure they're all pointers. actually more important that that's a pointer than you might expect, because if you're going to copy it, there are a couple of things it needs to do. Ow. Yep, just more typos. RS, so yeah, that was I don't know why I went lowercase for the second letter and that. So there it is, because that sounds like R's, whereas capital R, capital S is like render system, whereas capital R, little s is like, what's that? So, and and I do remember to add that error. Okay, good. That's a relief. I really do like that about programming in Go. The errors are really quite helpful. Help you to find where you've got type stuff wrong and mix things up. This panic confused me for a while, but basically the problem was I didn't call a method on the new font I'd made, which was to, I think it's called create font from something. We'll get to that in a minute. Once I fix that, it starts working. So I'll skip through until I find that. And okay, so at this point I've worked it out. The answer is create preloaded. So the method I was looking for in the end was create preloaded. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this out of here, put it in a new font variable, and then call the create preloaded on it, and then I can send it back in. So it's error : equals font dot create preloaded, and it doesn't take any. And of course, if there's an error, I just want to panic, so just handle that, just in case something goes wrong there. Really want to know if that's not worked, though. It's funny, I was watching Francis Compoy do some coding. He's one of the honchos in Golang, I consider. And I think most of his code is just this. Do this, if error, do that, error. It was quite impressive to watch. You can see that he does a channel called Just for Funk. I quite enjoy watching that. He's been making Flappy Bird recently. Or Flappy Gopher. There we go, so it's compiled, it's working, but it's not visible. The text isn't on the screen. Problem is, because I didn't set its Z index to the front, or that's one of the problems. I think there are actually many problems. But the most sensible one, I think, to fix first is to stick it on the front. So I've created this text entity, but I haven't set its Z index or the other things. Notice that render component has this method set Z index and set shader. These methods are kind of handy, and I don't need to do them myself. Oh no, this is not good. This is me doing some weird. So yeah, I needed to make sure the thing. So here I said I need to call some functions on this text entity now that I've created it, and that is set index, a property that belongs to the render component. but because it's an anonymous child, its methods directly inherited by the parent, so I can just do that. And I also need to set its shader. And this is basically it. If you want to make something not move, you just call the set shader HUD dot or common dot HUD shader. It's that simple, and suddenly it's there on the screen, and it won't move. It gives its position relative to the top left corner of the screen. There we go. It's nice for autocorrect to make sure I type things correctly. Not autocorrect, autocomplete. And we return res. Do I remember to do that now? Probably. Apparently not. Apparently not. And yet there's no complaints. Oh, that's because I just ran whack. I didn't actually run go. I didn't call go run. I just ran whack. I'm like, oh, it's fine. It's still doing the thing. So now we try it with a build because we're like this. That's the problem. Go run. And there's the problem. Who forgot to return the thing? See, again, Golang is always helpful when it tells you these things. You could go for weeks in JavaScript and not find that kind of error. That's probably not true. It's you again. If you watch all that stuff and you make sure you do your proper testing. Oh, there it is. Look, there's the screen. The numbers on the screen: H and 0 and S and 0. They're displaying, but they're not doing much more than that, and they're not changing. So now the challenge is to get them to change. So remember, that's that key thing. Set shader common dot HUD shader makes it fit the square. So I put them in the wrong place, so this is just me making them fill out a bit more space so they're more visible. So now we want to see it change when we do an update. So for loop through the players and set the number, right? And we need to choose the correct one. So that'll do. So we set the health display to show set score. No, that should be set num. I'll probably get there in a minute. That's better. So increment score and do set num. And now there's a panic. Oh, that panic was easy to solve actually. I'd just mistaken a button. I'd forgotten to actually fill in what the text was, which I was supposedly using. But that wasn't the only problem here. I actually had to get rid of that altogether and change the whole system. You'll see how it all changes. So here I finally work out what the problem is. I think the who forgot to put the text to be an actual thing, right? That should at least get rid of the panic. Cannot use db as a pointer to a comment.txt. So then I start to think, oh yeah, and then I had a problem because I was like, I thought if I make this a pointer, then they can both have a pointer and it will be okay, and the pointer fulfills the interface. But now I couldn't see the text anymore. So, new problem, new fix. But the thing is, because the drawable is just a copy of the DB, it's not a pointer copy, it's an actual separate thing. If I change the thing at text, it won't actually have the desired effect of changing the drawable. So I couldn't do what seems to be the obvious thing, is just to make that point to the same thing. And I found that a little bit surprising and mildly annoying. So in the end, I finally did what I said at the beginning of this episode. I got rid of the text component, made it a font, I think. And that allowed me to store it and then just remake a new thing on the render component. So no longer do I need to add the text bit. So we now set the drawable to a new drawable, which is a new text entity with the text rewritten. And the text actually has the structure, it requires these two details, so why not just copy and paste? Well, partly because that's wrong. It shouldn't have that 0 as a text 0. That was not my brightest moment. Still. And then of course I just change it to an N inside the quotes and don't even notice. Obviously that shouldn't be in quotes, and it will need to be corrected to make it to convert it to a string. And here I've realized the problem is I need to keep that font available. So that's fixing that problem. And of course the pre needs to be a TE dot as well, because it has to exist. So it turned out copying and pasting wasn't that bright. That's me trying to replace. And yes, it says the N, whoop-de-doo. It's not supposed to say an N though, it's supposed to say a 0, isn't it? Or it's supposed to show an incrementing number. And hopefully you know why that is, because we have mentioned it. And there it is. There's the problem. Those two quotes around that N. And the answer, because I can't just make it a normal, you can't just add a string with an integer and everything's fine, so I decided sprintf was the best way of doing that. May not be the best way, it certainly was the easiest for me. I guess string convert A to I would probably be quicker. I2A. Because it doesn't then have to pass the sprintf. Anyway, the sprintf is quite efficient really, so maybe not. There we go. So now it's saying 1. Aha! And that's because the players are not stored as pointers, so it doesn't matter how much I change the pointer. Here we go. Make that a pointer. Doesn't normally need too much fixing elsewhere, but a couple of places. 89. There you go, stick the and in front of that, and that probably should fix all the problems. There you go, and now we have the high scores raising up. That's good. So basically the program, the heads up display with a changing bit is there. It will have to wait until next time before we go into real detail about how to use the messages, and that's the focus for next week. As an aside, do let me show you this working with 2 players quickly. As I say, that was how I did it with the flags. Now we've got 2 players and both of them can kind of move their guys around. Have some fun, stay well, and I'll see you next week, and we will look at whatever it was I said we would. The message system in Engo. Bye for now.